Namo Buddhaya. Good evening. Welcome to the Buddha Dharma TV. I am Karen Tan. Today we start our program, as always, with a blessing service. We are going to listen to the chanting of the first part of Jaya Mingala Gata, stanzas of joyous victory, and it is conducted by Venerable Dembatawa Upalawana. To attain the desired calmness, please listen to the chanting mindfully, calmly, and peacefully.
Bahum sahasnsa mabhinim mitasayu dhantan girimekhalang udita ghora sasena marang danadi dhamma vidina jitva munindo tang tejasa bhavatu te jaya mangalani maratireka mabhiyud jita sabba ratting ghorang pana lavaka makha matadha yakkhang khanti sudanta vidhina jitva munindo tang tejasa bhavatu te jaya mangalani nalagiring gajavarang atimatha bhutang davaggichapka masaniva sudarunantang mittam buseka vidhina jitva munindo tang tejasa bhavatu te
segment, Venerable Ajahn Achalo of Australia articulates a compelling insight into a frequently asked questions, experiencing and applying spiritual power. Let us welcome the Venerable to elucidate on this topic. This section marks the first part of his enlightening sermon on this topic.
So, in a couple of hours, people who've joined us for the 3 days will be going back to their normal life. Somebody said to me, Ajahn, you called this retreat the 5 spiritual powers that lead to the deathless. And have you addressed these yet? This person asked. And actually I have been talking about these things, not as one talk, but as themes. If you recall, just as a little synopsis now, if you recall when we were taking refuge, we were exploring what is Buddha, who was Buddha, what were the conditions that gave rise to a Buddha, what are the qualities of Buddha, and then, as importantly, recognizing that Lord Buddha demonstrated our potential. And so understanding that the refuge in Buddha is refuge in nature, ultimate nature, and your ultimate nature, and kind of affirming that at the heart of your experience is this extraordinary potential. So the first of the spiritual powers is faith. And then faith, when it's in the right place, is an extremely powerful and useful energy. So Lord Buddha says about these, the 5 powers, actually they're faculties. So they come up in the 37 Wings to Awakening as 2 separate lists. The first is listed as the 5 faculties, and then the second time it's listed as the 5 powers. How I understand this is that these faculties exist in our minds. We have a faculty of faith. And so if you don't have faith in Buddha, people, you'll find they have faith in something, or they put their faith in something, and sometimes that faith is skillful, sometimes it's unskillful, sometimes it's wise, sometimes it's unwise. You see a lot of young people these days, if they don't have a spiritual worldview, or if they don't have a spiritual mentor, if they haven't met spiritual practitioners with integrity, you see how devoted they can become to singers and actors, and plaster the wall with the pictures of movie stars, and listen to every silly thing that they say on their Twitter account. You see people have a loving devotion to celebrities. And so in a way, for many people, celebrities have become the deities of the modern world. And unfortunately we see so often celebrities falling from grace, having great difficulties in their own lives, so in many respects they're not very sound role models, perhaps some occasional exceptions. But when you have faith in Buddha, place your faith in Buddhahood, Lord Buddha, the qualities of a Buddha, and then you recognize that that's your potential, Buddha nature, sometimes called. The fact of having a mind which is affected by greed, hatred and delusion, the very fact that we start with that, if that's the starting point, mind can be purified. So this is a cause for optimism. And it also makes it clear what our work is, the teachings of all Buddhas. Do good, avoid harm, purify the mind. So the doing good and the avoiding harm, this is a very important part of purifying the mind, weakening the power of greed, weakening the power of hatred, putting it within a container. That's how ethical precepts, practicing patient endurance. And in a way this is like nurturing that potential. And if we allow coarse forms of greed, coarse forms of hatred to take root and grow, find expression in our speech and in our actions, then that mind is not being purified. That mind is being defiled. So we understand that the ethical training is to support your potential, to allow it to shine through. And I often talk, when talking about Sila, Ajahn Nan explains that when you keep these precepts, you don't break these rules. It's not just the case that you refrain from unskillful things. What occurs is virtue is a palpable quality that then resides in your heart. So you become, I don't like the word morality myself, but I love the word virtue, and I like the word ethical responsibility, ethical conduct, ethical standard. So because we maintain an ethical standard, we have ethics, what happens is your virtue is able to blossom, and you become a person imbued with, possessed of virtue. It's a very beautiful quality, and when you keep these precepts long enough, you can feel this goodness, inner worth, inner value. And when you break the precepts, you can feel that you harmed something, and there's a healthy sense of remorse. You want to take care of your goodness, and so faith in your Buddha nature, your Buddha potential, then you have to nurture that. Work in accordance with the laws of nature so that your nature can blossom, shine, grow in these beautiful ways. So I was affirming that on the very first day. Faith in Buddha's liberation is also faith in your potential. And we were talking about the fact that as a bodhisattva, even before he was a bodhisattva, he started just the same as us. Basically, the starting point of any Buddha is an ordinary mind which is affected by greed, hatred and delusion. Because of incredible sincerity, a great deal of effort and determination over a very long period of time, the Buddha becomes a bodhisattva, and then a great bodhisattva. At a certain point, he meets a Buddha, and he becomes so inspired. But even before meeting that Buddha, this being has exceptional compassion, aspiration, altruism, to wanting to help many beings, to be free from suffering. But at some point, the bodhisattva meets a Buddha, he's so inspired by the Buddha, he makes a lot of offerings and then makes a vow, due to this merit, may I be a Buddha also. And then he receives a prediction, a confirmation, and that Buddha then is able to say, through the power of that merit and also through the power of that Buddha's mind, is able to see the future eon where that being will become a Buddha. And so after that point, spending incredible amount of time working on the perfections, the paramis. So when we consider that, we can all feel grateful. I was even encouraging feelings of awe for the extraordinary millions of acts of kindness, millions of acts of renunciation, millions of acts of restraint, thousands and thousands of lives of contemplation and meditation, listening to Dhamma, perfecting the wisdom barami, the sila barami, the metta barami. It's incredible. But in terms of our Buddha potential or our Buddha nature, we don't have to develop all of those qualities to that same degree. When we look at Lord Buddha's teaching, there is this path, dana, sila, pavana, the Eightfold Path. We are generous, warm-hearted, good-hearted, and then ethical. And then we practice our meditation and develop our mindfulness. So this is faith, is putting it in the right place, understanding the true refuge is ultimate nature, and the only way you realize your ultimate nature, the only way you get liberated from delusion that obscures ultimate nature, is through practicing the threefold training. So we have then faith in the path, faith in the ultimate truth, faith in ultimate nature, and faith in the path that is, sometimes you use the phrase, living in accordance with, practicing Dhamma in accordance with Dhamma. So you have to walk the path so that you can realize Dhamma. So you might have a lot of study, you might have a lot of knowledge, you might listen to a lot of Dhamma talks, but if you still can't get it together to keep the precepts and have a daily meditation practice, you're not going to realize it. The thickness of the kilesa will obscure insight. But if you do practice correctly, in accordance with Dhamma, the kilesa get thinner and thinner, and the mindfulness gets stronger. Wisdom gets sharper, and then you do have penetrative insight, and the insight literally weakens and then finally uproots and destroys the roots of the kilesa, and then that's how a mind is purified. But it is a gradual process. So understanding what we have faith in, and then really making a lot of that faith, giving rise to that faith, and taking care of your faith. And so there's finding ways to express it. That we've been doing the morning and evening chanting. I always light candles. We've got some nice flowers. We offer fragrances. These are ways that we express our faith and our gratitude. Bowing, these kinds of things. It's faith, and then energy, and then sati. So what I've been emphasizing as well is the consistency of the mindfulness, placing it on the breath, coming back to the breath, being aware of thoughts as thoughts, not picking up the thoughts, not following on the thoughts. So this has been the emphasis on the mindfulness, which will continue for those who are continuing on in the retreat. And so what I think you will have noticed is that in the very act of restraining the mind in a skillful way and coming back to the breath again and again and again, not following on with the thoughts, not picking up the thoughts about the past, and gently coming back, and not letting the mind go off into the future, and not thinking about a situation at home, a situation at work, and just saying, deal with that later. And what happens is energy builds up in the mind. So you've got sattha, faith, viriya, energy, sati, mindfulness. So I wasn't placing emphasis on energy. I was encouraging you to practice in a way, and I think what you'll notice now, you've already done 15 sitting meditation sessions and a good number of walking meditation sessions, so even just within 3 days of practice, I think that people will be able to feel that there's more energy in the mind, and that would manifest as a feeling, a palpable sense of presence, a sense of clarity, more of a sense of space around your thoughts, around your feelings. And then because of that, then we come to the next one, samadhi. So samadhi, I like to call it right collectedness. Samma samadhi is right collectedness. So modern people have a debilitating habit of not recognizing the samadhi that they have, wanting more, and not noticing. And I really like the way my teacher Ajahn Anan talks about samadhi, because he doesn't just talk about jhana and the jhanas as being samadhi. Basically, khanika samadhi is when the mind is peaceful for a couple of minutes, and upajjhara samadhi is when the mind is peaceful for longer periods, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. And basically this is all samadhi. And so in appreciating the samadhi that you have, and in inclining the mind to rest with its collectedness, that's exactly what will condition the arising of jhana in its own time, according to nature. But you have to bring the mind to whatever stillness, whatever collectedness it will come to, and bring it to that again and again and again, and then just stay still. But it's with an attitude of appreciation, and with an attitude of contentment. Other qualities I keep mentioning, care, cherishing, appreciation, these very beautiful mental qualities, that the samadhi deepens by itself. So the way I understand Ajahn Chah's focus is it's the maintaining of mindfulness in all postures. Mindfulness with clear comprehension. It's like knowing pleasant feelings, neutral feelings, unpleasant feelings, but also knowing wholesome thoughts as wholesome, unwholesome as unwholesome, various factors of skillful view. It's in maintaining mindfulness and clear comprehension that the samadhi develops by itself. And when it does, it's a samma samadhi, it's correct samadhi, samadhi that is wholesome, not the unskillful type of samadhi. And so you can see how faith plays a large role in having the energy to then apply the mindfulness consistently, having the resolution. And so we were talking about examples of the monks and nuns going off where there were ghosts and going off where there were tigers and various things that they did because they had faith, but they were concerned about laziness or lack of consistency, so they would take themselves to a place where they would really pick up this practice as part of their refuge and then experiment. What's it like when you really embrace the meditation object and maintain it in being consistently, and often getting really great results. And we had a challenge where we don't have the tigers and we don't have the haunted cemeteries, so what do we do? And I was recommending contemplating not just death but also rebirth, because myself, I have a fear of taking an inauspicious rebirth if I can't be mindful as I'm dying. I have some fear, I think it's a wholesome fear, skillful fear, of not being able to patiently endure with painful, racking feelings if I should have a debilitating disease as I approach death. And so with that kind of healthy concern, then feeling inspired or feeling determined, feeling resolved to be consistent with the practice, keep trying, understanding, especially these retreat situations, the limited time that we have is a time to really investigate, is it true what the Ajahn saying? If I'm consistently with my mindfulness, does some samadhi arise? If we're kind of looking for amazing, blissful, radiant states, you won't even recognize the samadhi that you've experienced. But basically, those periods where there wasn't much thinking, and there was a sense of stillness, a sense of coolness, a sense of clarity, a sense of tranquility, that's samadhi. And it's in bringing the mind to that and then resting and doing this again and again and again that samadhi becomes the jhana samadhi that the people crave for. But it only comes through laying the causes and bringing the mind to that space and allowing it to rest, deepening. So we have our faith in Buddha and our potential. We have the energy that arises both from faith and also from consistent practice. Also, energy arises from keeping the precepts. So when you don't keep the precepts, you'll have a lot of remorse, anxiety, lacking in dignity and self-respect. So I also put focus on forgiveness, because there's no point dwelling on past mistakes. That's already done. We do hopefully learn from it, but I put emphasis on forgiveness, loving acceptance, because metta is another way that we empower the mind, energize the mind, bless the present moment rather than have useless regrets about the past. The past is the past, it really is gone. And yes, we all make mistakes, but we have to learn from them. It's when you have metta for yourself that you don't do the mistakes again, because you care for yourself and others, and recognizing and respecting your potential and then wanting to honor it, wanting to develop it, wanting to realize it, then you won't do things that obstruct that. So the metta practice, another way we give rise to energy. Faith gives rise to energy, but especially the consistency with the mindfulness practice, not allowing the mind to run off in fantasies, not being distracted in the social media and the news and gossiping and all of that stuff. And so when the energy comes up, that's what becomes samadhi. When the energy settles, when the energy collects, when the mind isn't flowing out the sense doors as much, and it isn't flowing out the mind door as much in thoughts about the past and future, then it's just able to be in the present, and you'll notice it gets more and more energized, more and more palpable, the sense of energy. That can become rapture and tranquility. And so I'm sure everybody has some experience of some tranquility and some rapture. Then we come to wisdom. So we've got the faith, energy, mindfulness, collectedness, samadhi, and then wisdom. So I'm going to go through the Anattalakkana Sutta, speaking of wisdom. I promised people would go through that. Basically, when I was instructing you to notice the impermanence, notice the arising and the ceasing, notice the arising and the ceasing. So that's the wisdom practice. And then in not thinking about the past and in not thinking about the future, in just trying to stay in the present, seeing a thought as a thought, less identification. That's also wisdom. A thought arises and ceases. It's not self. So when you pick up the thoughts, follow on with thoughts and get lost in the thoughts, there's no wisdom. But when you're able to detach a little and just see a thought as a thought, there is mindfulness and wisdom present. It's just a thought. Same with the feelings. Encouraging people to bear with them as much as they can, investigate, notice the constant change and flux in feeling. So the awareness of anicca, and when you're able to detach, it's no longer my knee pain. It's just pain. And also, when mindfulness is good and clear, sometimes it's not pain, sometimes it's rapture, sometimes it's just feelings. Pleasant feelings, neutral feelings, painful feelings, all of them arising and ceasing and changing. There's actually millions of little feelings there if we have a closer look with a clearer mindfulness. So this emphasis on right mindfulness, consistent mindfulness, in just looking at things as they are, wisdom arises. Mindfulness is sometimes called truth-discerning awareness. I like that phrase. So mindfulness is that which sees things more correctly as they are, with less delusion permeating the experience. So in those 4 foundations of mindfulness, the Lord Buddha is asking us to see the body as a body, see feelings as feelings, see thoughts as thoughts, and mind objects as mind objects, dhammas as dhammas. In doing this, just applying the bare awareness, the clear awareness that sees these things more objectively, that sense of identification falls away, and then you look closer and closer. It's like with a magnifying glass or with good glasses, just seeing the characteristics of things. When you don't identify things as being a self, that's actually wisdom. And then letting go of the feeling of being a self, not picking it up, not projecting it, not making karma with it, and just being aware, arising and ceasing, just feeling, not my feeling, just thoughts, not my thoughts. This is mindfulness and wisdom. As the retreat progresses, and if people are diligent, this foundation or this momentum, the insights get deeper. There can be a really clear seeing of impermanence, and then there's a more profound sense of the sense of self dropping away, an experience of a radiant mind that experiences the body without perceiving it as a self or thinking that it's a self. So these very practices that you're doing are correct, the methods that you're doing are correct, and when you maintain it with enough momentum, and so you already have some mindfulness, you already have some samadhi, you already have some wisdom, and it's just continuing and doing it with momentum that these things become deeper, they become more profound. And the little insights become deep insights, and deep insights can become profound insights can become liberating insights. But nobody says it's easy. It does require diligence, consistency, a surrender, really embracing the practice wholeheartedly. But at least I know some of you have to go back, and I respect the fact that you were able to come for 3 days and you tried really hard. I think everybody's behaved very well, and I'd like you to make a commitment while you have some clarity and while you're recognizing your potential and your nature a little more clearly. I'd like you all to make some kind of a resolution to take care of these practices and try to make the time to come to another retreat, several retreats, whatever you can manage, but just make this a focus, because another phrase Ajahn Anan uses is the Arya Sap in Thai. It's the noble wealth. Often people are chasing wealth outside, and Ajahn Anan says this is the inner wealth, and this is the wealth that you can take with you. When you die, not yet liberated, have to take a rebirth, this wealth you can take. And Ajahn Anan says quite beautifully, no flood, no fire, no storm, no earthquake can destroy your inner wealth, and even death can't destroy it. So this is what should be the focus of our lives, is accumulating inner wealth. And it's something that's for people who've grown up in very materialistic cultures and in consumeristic societies. It's a subtle thing to really get that every moment of mindfulness, every period of collectedness, every little insight is actually wealth. But it is. is the true wealth, it's the inner wealth, it's the noble wealth, and it's the only wealth that you can take with you. So I hope that short discourse helped you to understand the 5 spiritual powers that lead to the deathless. We're going to have a look now. The Anattalakkhana Sutta is a fairly short, clear sutta. The people who have to leave, I just want to ask, can you raise your hands, the people who have to leave? Okay. Going to ask you now, who understands what Buddha is a little more clearly of those people? Very good. How many people feel more mindfulness than they did 3 days ago? Okay. Did anybody experience periods of collectedness, some tranquility, stillness? Very good. How about seeing things as impermanent more clearly? Yeah, okay. Less identification with feelings, with emotions, with moods? Very good. So this is the 5 spiritual powers functioning in your minds due to diligent practice. Very good. Just as a little bit of an introduction to the sutta, these 5 monks in the deer park had been practicing with the Bodhisattva when he was practicing the extreme of austerity. So if you recall, he was taking, I think, a little bit less than half a palm of rice, and he said that he became so emaciated that the stomach skin was touching the back skin in his body, and when he rubbed his arms, the hairs were falling out, and when he got up to go to the toilet, he would fall over. And he said that he wasn't allowing himself to enter jhana, even though he was adept, because if you recall, the Bodhisattva had studied with 2 teachers, and those teachers had taught him the jhanas, both the form jhanas and the formless jhanas. So the first 8 jhanas the Bodhisattva had mastery of. He had seen that they are a conditioned phenomena that degenerates. So even though it's incredibly blissful and boundless, and most people, by the way, would be completely deluded by that. You would grasp it and you would love it, and as soon as it degenerated, you'd do it again. And it's only the Bodhisattva with this incredible mindfulness and wisdom already present as spiritual powers that he could see this isn't the deathless, this also dies. So then he was experimenting, what about the absolute extreme of patient endurance? So that meant just bearing with. I'm sure he was sitting doing this pain practice, so you all know what it's like to have knee pain if you don't move for an hour. And imagine the Bodhisattva just sitting all day in the one posture, and the racking pains, and not to mention the hunger pains, and the cold, and the heat, and all the rest of it. And so he said about his heroic striving during that period that it is possible for a spiritual practitioner to have suffered as much in the past, because of, as we know, there have been many previous Buddhas. But he also did say it is impossible that any spiritual practitioner ever suffered more. So we know that it was pretty intense. So at a certain point he realized this isn't working either. And he decided that he was going to take a bath, and he decided that he was going to have some nourishing food, because he remembered under the rose apple tree as a youth, prince, he entered an absorption. He remembered that first experience of entering a jhana. It was the rice ploughing ceremony at the beginning of the wet season, and he was under the rose apple tree, and he was looking at the beautiful colours and the nice ceremony and the joy and the lovely weather, and he closed his eyes and he entered jhana. So when you get your jhanas together for lifetimes, and it might be that easy for us in the future too. But anyway, he was looking back on that experience, and he realized that that was a kind of a pleasure that was harmless. It was a type of pleasure that was pure. It had a certain quality of purity, pure mental pleasure. And he wondered, if I was to combine that kind of concentration with focused investigation or contemplation, might that be the way that leads to the deathless? And he had a direct knowing, yes, 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 that's it. And so he decided to give up the austerity practice. So what happened at that point is these 5 other monks thought, Gautama has reverted to luxury. That's the phrase they use. Gautama has reverted to luxury. And they were disgusted, and they abandoned him. And now the Buddha, of course, wandered down, had a bath. Sujata and her milkmaids offered him some milk rice. He accepted 8 bundles of kusha grass. He sat under the Bodhi tree and he made his aspiration, I will not get up until I'm liberated, let the blood dry up. And fortunately for us, he was liberated. After he was liberated, he was thinking, this is subtle, this is profound, most beings won't understand, this is going to be difficult to teach, I don't think I'll bother. And he delighted in the peace of the liberation for a week. At a certain point, was it Brahma or Indra? Brahma Sahampati came down and said, Lord, please teach, because there are beings that will understand. They have little dust in their eyes. So the Buddha, newly enlightened Buddha, by that stage, you imagine his spiritual powers totally blossomed, totally ripened to their fullest potential. His divine eye was extraordinary. In fact, one of the ways, part of his enlightenment experience was reviewing hundreds, even thousands of past lives, both of himself and other beings. So incredible divine eye faculty, laser-like precision and vast in its capacity to contemplate. So he scanned the beings of the universe and he saw that beings' minds were like lotus, and most were like these small buds in the murky water or down in the mud. And it was true. Those beings will not understand teachings on the middle way. They will not understand the 4 foundations of mindfulness. But then he saw there are other lotus buds higher up, some close up to the surface of the water, already beginning to open, and those above the water. And he realized there are those beings with little dust in their eyes who will understand. He also, the Brahma Sahampati said, these beings are wilting through not hearing the teachings. Please help them. There's a possibility that beings could degenerate if they don't hear this in time. So Buddha started to think, well, who could I teach? He thought of his first 2 teachers who taught him the jhanas, and he saw with his divine eye that they'd already been reborn in very high Brahma realms as a result of their absorptions. They'd already died, they were older than the Buddha, and they'd been born in very high Brahma realms, and he realized he couldn't teach them. Then out of compassion he thought of these 5 companions. Even though they'd rejected him and insulted him, he saw their spiritual faculties were ripe enough that he could teach them and they would understand. So he walked from Bodh Gaya. By that stage they'd moved on to the deer park near Varanasi, Istipatana Migadaye, the deer park in Istipatana. So when he went there, they said, don't greet him, don't pay respects to him, here comes that reverted to luxury monk. When they saw him, they saw that he was very radiant, and they did get up and take his bowl and his robes and made him a seat. They couldn't help themselves. Then he tried to teach them in the Dhammacakka Sutta, and I think they said, you reverted to luxury, how could you know anything? And he said for a 3rd time, have I ever spoken to you like this before? I have found the deathless. If you listen to me, I will explain. And say, okay, you haven't spoken like this before. And so they did listen. And Anya, Kondanya, became a Sotapanna upon hearing the teachings of the Four Noble Truths. That dukkha has a cause, and that the cause can be abandoned. In hearing the teaching that there is a cause of dukkha, and the cause of dukkha can be let go of, and that the mind can be liberated from dukkha, Anya Kondanya had the insight, all that has the nature to arise has the nature to cease, and he became the first Sotapanna. So in the following days, Lord Buddha taught this sutta, where he explained, when you look at it, the words, it's a very basic, and so just as a bit of a lead up though, what we can recognize here is that these were like spiritual heroes. They were practicing austerity, if not as extreme as the Bodhisattva, Gautama, a very similar level of practicing hardships. And so these people had great patient endurance, they had incredible resolution, incredible sincerity. So we read this simple teaching and we understand it as a theory, but by the end of the 2 pages we're not arahants. But when Lord Buddha explained it to these bhikkhus, after those 2 pages, they were arahants. And so this is the 5 spiritual powers that I was talking about. When cultivated, when made much of, lead to the deathless, merge in the deathless. So whatever practice you do, cultivating your faith, developing your energy, sustaining your mindfulness, developing insight, establishing concentration, so that becomes a power. If those powers are not yet powerful, even you hear the correct teaching, you don't yet become enlightened. So one does have to cultivate them. And then they do need to be at a certain level. That lotus needs to be about to blossom. So if we're still down in the mud, we've got work to do. And it's not necessarily that the Ajahn didn't explain it properly.
Ajahn, what's the difference between the jhana under the rose apple tree and the jhanas that don't lead to deathless?
No, they do. But his insight was combining it with investigation and contemplation.
And was it all of the jhanas, or is it sort of one in particular?
So it's not in the jhana that you contemplate. You enter the jhana and one comes out of the jhana and then uses the energy from the samadhi in the contemplation.
So it was the contemplation element that he wasn't.
That's right.
Okay. And then the second question is, why did he have to be asked to teach? Like, he's enlightened, wouldn't he have come to that himself?
There's different theories about it. One interesting theory, this is a little bit of a distraction, but one interesting theory is that the powers of Mara and the powers of delusion are very powerful. Obstructive forces in the universe are powerful. So when a Brahma god descends from heaven and says, Buddha, please teach, all of those heavenly beings notice that. And they see, oh, there is a Buddha. He's enlightened. Then they have to do their duty to protect the Buddha and protect Dhamma practitioners. Whereas if they weren't aware of that, they might not do their duty. So that's one possibility. It might have been a posturing so that could happen, so that all those heavenly beings then get with the program and make their barami as well in protecting the practitioners and the Buddha. So I think there's probably something to that. So, yeah. Thus have I heard. One time the Blessed One was dwelling at Benares in the deer park. There he addressed the group of 5 bhikkhus. Form, bhikkhus, is not self. If, bhikkhus, form was self, then form would not lead to affliction, and one might be able to say in regard to form, let my form be thus, let my form not be thus. But since, bhikkhus, form is not self, form therefore leads to affliction, and one is not able to say in regard to form, let my form be thus, let my form not be thus. So it's true, isn't it? Average age of this retreat is a little bit over 50. Can any of you will your bodies to be 15 years old again? So it goes its own way, doesn't it? And we can't stop it. So we refer to it as my body, but it seems to have its own nature. Feeling is not self. If, bhikkhus, feeling was self, feeling would not lead to affliction, and one might be able to say in regard to feeling, let my feeling be thus, let my feeling not be thus. But since, bhikkhus, feeling is not self, feeling therefore leads to affliction, and one is not able to say in regard to feeling, let my feeling be thus, let my feeling not be thus. So that peaceful mind state that you had, were you able to hold on to it and only experience that? How many people had the experience of a peaceful mind state degenerating, being replaced by a painful one? And how many people had a painful mind state becoming a peaceful one? Very good. But we can't will it to be as we like, when we like. What about the knee pain? Can you just decide that it goes away? How about arthritis? I no longer have these painful feelings. Perception is not self. If bhikkhus' perceptions were self, perception would not lead to affliction. One might be able to say in regard to perception, let my perception be thus, let my perception not be thus. But since bhikkhus' perception is not self, perception therefore leads to affliction, and one is not able to say in regard to perception, let my perception be thus, let my perception not be thus. So All of the things we've experienced in the past, that's how we perceive things. We perceive things according to our memories, to our experience, and so things come up and we perceive them in a certain way. And it's largely due to the way we perceive them in the past. So we can't just decide that I'm going to perceive all of the people in the room as devas and appreciate their beautiful qualities every time I see them. There's certain people you see them and there is and certain people you see them and there's like and this is things latent in the mind functioning. And it's the same with the weather, how people perceive it. Cold, chilly mornings, and the mind can become depressed if it's grey for too long, and become happy and exuberant when it's very sunny. And these things, we're not in control of it. We can be mindful of it, we can try not to let it overpower the mind, but we can't control the way we perceive things. Mental formations are not self. If bhikkhus' mental formations were self, mental formations would not lead to affliction, and one might be able to say in regard to mental formations, let my mental formations be thus, let my mental formations not be thus. But since bhikkhus' mental formations are not self, mental formations therefore lead to affliction, and one is not able to say in regard to mental formations, let my mental formations be thus, let my mental formations not be thus. So, many times I've said, thoughts about the future, don't pick them up. Deal with the future when it comes. How many people, even with this instruction, found that the mind ran off into the future and they couldn't really stop it? Similarly with the past. I mentioned that practice I do myself of noting how many times I think a thought when I get a bit fed up with it, just to give myself the message, yes, I heard it the first 100 times. But you can't just say, don't ever think that thought again. And mine is particularly stubborn. If you do say, don't ever think that thought again, you'll probably find that you'll think it more. This is how you just have to seeing thought as a thought, not identifying with it. But you can't forbid thoughts. It doesn't work. And so we understand their nature. How many people feel tormented by their thought formations at times? Yeah, everybody. So it does lead to affliction. Consciousness is not self. If bhikkhus' consciousness were self, consciousness would not lead to affliction, and one might be able to say in regard to consciousness, let my consciousness be thus, let my consciousness not be thus. But since bhikkhus' consciousness is not self, consciousness therefore leads to affliction. One is not able to say in regard to consciousness, let my consciousness be thus, let my consciousness not be thus. So consciousness is a complex thing to understand. We have ear consciousness, eye consciousness, nose, tongue, body, and mental consciousness. But just one example is a sense of the bright and happy mind with some samadhi. That's a radiant mind state. It's a radiant consciousness, and so we can't just will that into being. And then it's the same with depression. If the mind falls into a depression and there's a sense of gloomy, glum, grey heaviness in the heart, in the mind, you can't just will that away either. So you can't just say, may I have the consciousness of, or if you could, entering jhana at will, just, these things are a process. You have to understand their conditions and lay the causes and work with the conditions. Even with people who are adept at jhana, there's a process for entering and there's a process for coming out of. And that was the Bodhisattva's insight. Even the jhanas, they have causes and conditions and they degenerate. So that was his profound insight about the jhanas, is that they're not permanent. We can't just have the state of the infinite base of space constantly. One has to keep generating that conscious state. So it's not dependable. And it is, because of that, it leads to affliction. What do you think about this, bhikkhus? Is form permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, Lord. But is that which is impermanent painful or pleasurable? Painful, Lord. Is it fit to consider that which is impermanent and painful of a nature to age as this is mine? I am this is myself. It is not, Lord. What do you think about this, bhikkhus? Is feeling permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, Lord. Is that which is impermanent painful or pleasurable? Painful, Lord. Is it fit to consider that which is impermanent, painful, of a nature to age, as this is mine? I am this is myself? It is not, Lord. What do you think about this? Is perception permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, Lord. Is that painful or pleasurable? Painful. Is it fit to consider that which is impermanent, painful, of a nature to change, as this is mine, I am this is myself? It is not, Lord. What about mental formations? Permanent or impermanent? Impermanent. Painful or pleasurable? Painful. Is it fit to consider that which is impermanent, painful, of a nature to age, change? This is mine, I am this is myself? It is not, Lord. What do you think about consciousness? Because is consciousness permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, Lord. But is that which is impermanent painful or pleasurable? Painful, Lord. But is it fit to consider that which is impermanent, painful, of a nature to change, as this is mine, I am this is myself? It is not, Lord. So then Lord Buddha instructs them now how to relate to these things wisely. Wherefore, bhikkhus, whatever form there is, past, future, present, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, whether it is near or far, all form should, by means of right wisdom, be seen as it really is thus. This is not mine, I am not this is not myself. Whatever feeling there is, past, future, present, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, whether it is far or near, all feeling should, by means of right wisdom, be seen as it really is. This is not mine, I am not this is not myself. Whatever perception there is, past, future, present, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, whether it is far or near, all feeling should, by means of right wisdom, be seen as it really is thus. This is not mine, I am not this is not myself. Whatever mental formations there are, past, future, present, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, whether they are far or near, all mental formations should, by means of right wisdom, be seen as they really are. This is not mine, I am not this is not myself. Similarly with consciousness, whatever consciousness, past, future, present, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, near or far, all consciousness should, by means of right wisdom, be seen as it really is thus. This is not mine, I am not this is not myself. Seeing in this way, bhikkhus, the wise, noble disciple becomes disenchanted with form, becomes disenchanted with feeling, becomes disenchanted with perception, becomes disenchanted with mental formations, becomes disenchanted with consciousness. Becoming disenchanted, their passions fade away. With the fading of passion, the heart is liberated. With liberation there comes the knowledge it is liberated, and they know, destroyed is birth, the holy life has been lived out, done is what had to be done, there is no more coming into any state of being. Thus spoke the Blessed One, delighted the group of 5 bhikkhus rejoiced in what the Lord had said. Moreover, while this discourse was being delivered, the minds of the 5 bhikkhus were freed from the defilements through clinging no more. So that's a really wonderful and awesome paragraph, and that sentence in particular. Becoming disenchanted, their passions fade away. With the fading of passion, their heart is liberated. That simple. So this is an interesting word, disenchanted. I think in Pali it's nibbida. And the passions fading, viraga. So there's some important things to acknowledge about that as a process. So we are fascinated, we're engrossed and fascinated, deluded by our bodies and our minds, and we're very committed to it. And when things go wrong, we like to blame things. It's the government's fault, or it's the weather's fault, it's the neighbour's fault, it's the kid's fault, it's the dog's fault. And often we don't look at the fact that it's our grasping that's the fault. It's our attachment that's the fault. And so when we become more mindful and more wise, we get that. We get that, no, it's my attaching, it's my thinking that I'm a self that's a problem. And it's my liking and disliking, that's the real problem. And then this sense of dispassion. You get fed up with that. And the reason I wanted to mention this is wholesome. This is a growth in wisdom, Bharami. This sense of being weary, being fed up. And that doesn't mean to say that you get angry and depressed and bitter and cynical. You have to understand, kind of a spiritual weariness is a wholesome thing. But it's no longer fascinated. You don't buy it anymore. You no longer think that you're going to be able to get samsara right. You're not going to be able to get samsara in order. You're not going to be able to arrange it in a certain way that you don't suffer anymore. You get that conditions are flawed. They are painful. They are impermanent. And then you get that you have to let go of your attachment to it. And that's where you become disenchanted with all of the tastes, the sounds, the sights, because you know they only give so much pleasure, and that pleasure doesn't last. And then there's the pain of being separated from it. And in being attached to the pleasure, you don't just get the pleasure, you get all the pain that's associated with the body and mind as well. And you just get that sense, it's not worth it. It's not a good deal. And you develop that intuition, there's something better. And that confidence, you are capable of experiencing something more dependable, more satisfactory, ultimately completely satisfactory, but it takes work. But this process of being disenchanted, becoming weary, this is what brings people to meditation retreats. This is what brings people to their meditation cushion. And one of the proximate causes for the arising of faith is actually suffering. If you don't have much suffering, you don't get around to investigating spiritual refuges unless you are born into a spiritually rich culture which still has some integrity. But most people, it's when life gets painful past a certain point that they start to seek the spiritual refuge. In becoming disenchanted, that means that you don't go chasing after it anymore. That's what allows the passion to weaken, becoming dispassionate, viraga. So there's the weariness. You spend more time alone. You spend more time meditating. You don't chase after these things. You restrain your sila and you refine your sila. In not acting on the greed, in not acting on the hatred, it starves. And the thickness of that kilesa that obscures your capacity to see things truthfully, the darkness of the greed and the hatred, gets thinner and thinner and thinner. There's this thin veil of greed and hatred, and then the spiritual powers, the mindfulness, the wisdom, and then the energy, you have the capacity to throw it off the mind, explode it out of the mind, if you like. And so this process, becoming weary, is actually an important part of the process. And then seeing the suffering, I was talking about, Ajahn Anand says the beginning stages of practice can feel like you're in the burning house. Everything's on fire and it can feel like you don't have anywhere to go. But seeing the dukkha clearly is really important, because that's what inclines the mind to want to go inwards to the only place where there isn't dukkha. The only place where there isn't dukkha is your own purified mind, and your own capacity to let go of your attachment. Then Ajahn Sumedho says, that which knows suffering isn't suffering. And Ajahn Anand said, it's through patiently enduring with knowing those painful feelings, so that's patiently enduring with mindfully knowing the unsatisfactoriness, that it becomes possible to see the burning house but not be in the middle of it burning. Part of the mind which knows this dukkha is cool. Mindfulness starts as a bit weak, but through training in mindfulness consistently it becomes strong mindfulness. Strong mindfulness becomes consistent strong mindfulness, and that becomes eventually what they call mahasati. Mahasati has the power to destroy the kilesa. So this is a process, becoming weary, then you have to put energy into cultivating your powers, because if you want something better, you have to work to establish that which is better in the mind. Other people who did it, the Buddha and the Sangha, but we have to do it. That's when it becomes the inner refuge, the spiritual qualities that become your own inner Buddha, your own inner Sangha. You become one who is practicing correctly, practicing rightly. Then you experience what it's like to have good sati, being able to detach, being able to see things as objects, as feelings, as a body. In doing this more consistently, the passions fade. In fading, the mind is liberated. So good to have confidence where it goes. Once those faculties have become powers, and once those powers are powerful enough, the day will come where you will be able to say, done is what had to be done, there is no more coming into being, and you became one of the noble ones. So I offer that for your reflection.
Let's take a short break to enjoy a melodious, blissful song. This is a very meaningful and devotional Buddhist hymn, The Mindful Ways, Peaceful Ways.
Do we all have true harmony? When will we be truly happy? All delusion, all hatred, and all greed are causing suffering indeed. When will we walk the middle path? The path to a wise, happy heart. Do not hesitate, do not wait. Remember, we all chant our faith. Careless, reckless, restless, heedless, drifting along without purpose. It's time to stop the days, it's time to stop the craze. Let's have mindful ways, peaceful days. Charity and morality, we all need to practice clearly. We too need mental purity for freedom and tranquility. Mindfulness is the way to peace, it's the way to Nibbana peace. When will we remove all fetters? When will we know Dharma matters? Careless, reckless, restless, heedless, drifting along without purpose. It's time to stop the days, it's time to stop the praise. Let's have mindful ways, peaceful days. Careless, reckless, restless, heedless, drifting along without purpose. It's time to stop the days, it's time to stop the praise. Let's have mindful ways, peaceful days. Careless, reckless, restless, heedless, drifting along without purpose. It's time to stop the days, it's time to stop the praise. Let's have mindful ways, peaceful days. Let's have mindful ways, peaceful days. Let's have mindful ways, peaceful days.
Please, now, join us for our upcoming insightful talk with Venerable Bhikkhuni Aya Satusika of the United States. Her insights are remarkably rational, requiring your outer focus to unravel the profound depths of her Dhamma discourses. Don't miss out as Venerable Bhikkhuni sheds light on the popular topic, the middle way. Now, please welcome Venerable Bhikkhuni Satusika to talk on this valuable topic.
Use this exquisite teaching of the Buddha to help us be happy, and happy in a very deep sense, a happiness that is stable through all the ups and downs of life. It can be a little bit difficult to imagine how that's possible if you haven't yet experienced it, but it's actually possible to feel grumpy, angry, hurt, frightened, as if everything's falling apart, and still in the background, solid and peaceful. I live with another nun who will say, I feel so grumpy. And it's like, yeah, there's the, the passing weather, and then there's the, really internally stable climate. And even if we don't have it externally, we can develop our way of thinking, our way of acting, our way of speaking that changes the way we are living, interacting with one another, and the elements of our character. That changes our habits. And when you think about it, what do we really have control over? We certainly can't control what other people are saying or doing or what they think of us. As much as we may try, we can't avoid being blamed. No one avoids that, not even the Buddha. We can't control the surroundings that we're in to a large degree. But what we can control, the only things really, are the way we speak and act and even think. So I find it very inspiring and encouraging and empowering when the Buddha talked about how we can come to a place where we can think what we want to think when we want to think it. We can train the mind to really observe reality and see it as it actually is. And I have to say, there's some kind of spiritual magic that goes on. It feels like magic when we put in the effort, hopefully with a kind of joy and enthusiasm, to practice, that insight arises, that this kind of internal peace, tranquility, joy arises, even in times when ordinarily you would expect to be falling apart. Because things are falling apart. And somehow, the alchemy of walking this Noble Eightfold Path instead produces a situation where things are falling apart and you're not falling apart. You're solid and even happy. So how does this happen? Well, this morning I want to look into what's generally called right view and right intention. Now, the only reason these things are right and not wrong is because they lead to this happiness and stability, this insight into the nature of reality that helps us be free from all clinging, from all suffering. So that's the ultimate, but along the way, we experience it in doses. And our life becomes steadily not like a definite, constant progression. But if you look back 2 years before, when we're kind of living by normal worldly values and encouraged by normal, greed, hatred, and delusion, then when we look back at the way things were before we started to dig into understanding Dhamma and dig into practice, then we really see a difference. And we see it all the time when people come to our little temple in California. People come and they're stressed and they're suffering. And first of all, they start to keep the 5 precepts, which Ayasoma talked about yesterday. And they start to see their life changing, and they start to become less affected by all the stress at work and the people that are, saying and doing whatever they're doing, and all those things that are outside of our control. So, right view, leading us to more happiness and less suffering, and right intention, they're considered to be the wisdom factors of the path. So you have the sila or virtue factors, and you have the samadhi or meditation factors, and then you have the wisdom. And the wisdom part comes first in the ordering, because we have to have a little bit of wisdom to even get going. It was your wisdom that brought you to come here this weekend, even on your birthday, because you know there's something good in it already, and you know that it kind of goes against the way of the world, which is clearly spinning out of control. And and so it's like in order to just step upon the path, we have to have a certain amount of right view. Now, there are classical definitions and tons of discussions and all kinds of things written about these qualities or factors. But I want to focus on what we can do to practice particularly. And there's a definition, you find it in the middle length discourses, in a discourse called Right View, where Venerable Sariputta is being asked about right view. And one of the things that he says is that right view can be defined or described as knowing the difference between what's wholesome and what's unwholesome. Again, wholesome and unwholesome, by the Buddha's definition, is what leads to peace and happiness and what leads to suffering and misery. So the Buddha and Venerable Sariputta in this case mentions 10 things that are wholesome and their opposites that are unwholesome. And the Buddha actually talks about this in over 100 suttas. It's mentioned again and again and again and again. So these top 10 are really important. And he starts with, it's wholesome and right view to avoid killing living beings. And it's unwholesome. And we have to have wrong view in order to intentionally kill a living being. And as Ayasoma pointed out yesterday, it's even those little tiny living beings. And I'm going to talk more about that probably this afternoon when I talk about the sila or the virtue aspects of the path, right action, right speech, and right livelihood. And then the second wholesome thing is, as you might guess, avoiding taking what isn't given. And then avoiding sexual misconduct. And avoiding lying. And then these 10, so we've got 4 so far, right? You're counting. It goes into the other aspects of right speech, which I'll talk in more detail later about too. But it's to avoid malicious speech or divisive speech, to avoid harsh speech, mean or coarse speech, and to avoid frivolous speech. And this afternoon I'll see if I can make it clear why frivolous speech or gossip actually makes it into the top 10 unwholesome things. It's kind of like, Okay. So I think now we have 7. And then the being free from longing is wholesome. And longing or covetousness, wanting something, often something that's not ours, but that wanting or that greed, that's unwholesome. And any kind of ill will. So goodwill is wholesome. The opposite of that wanting is letting go of things, sharing. And then the last one is ignorance, wrong view. So having right view means knowing that these 10 things are important and actually putting them into action in our life. And whenever we see ourselves, either thinking about doing some of those 10 unwholesome things or doing it or having done it, then we want to pay attention to that and not beat ourselves up. That doesn't really help. I don't know if you noticed that. It's like, it kind of just makes it worse. It's like doing something that's unskillful and then being cruel to ourselves about it, which is also unskillful. So the loving, kind, supportive, actually effective way to work with whatever we've done is to acknowledge it and forgive and learn from it and make the determination to not do that again. Not because we're bad or something, but just because it doesn't work. And it's not what we want. We want to live in a way that is uplifting to ourselves and to others. And it's kind of funny, everybody knows what we like in other people. I don't know of anybody who doesn't like a humble person or a kind person. It's like we all know what we admire, and somehow we think maybe we're not worthy of that, or we can't pull it off, or something. But we can, but it takes like little steps, or just continual attention, care. And we'll talk about that too, because one of the noble factors is right effort. We'll talk about how that works, not just in meditation, but in life. And it's beautiful to see the way all of these 8 pieces of the Noble Eightfold Path work together and support each other. Because we have to bring in mindfulness if we're going to have some sense of whether we're doing something that's wholesome or unwholesome. It has to be there. And it strengthens the mindfulness as we practice, as well as our right view. So it all works together. And what they say when there's full enlightenment is that all those 8 come together in a way that they can't even really be separated. So with right view, as we take it like this, these 10 wholesome things and their 10 opposites, we can really bring that into our thoughts and our words and our actions. So during this weekend, you're not going to be doing much speaking. You'll still be doing a lot of acting, because we have to. And the truth is that no matter what we do, there's damage to living beings, but it's not intentional. Walk across the floor, maybe you step on an ant or a spider or something, but you don't want to, you don't mean to. And our thoughts, obviously, like most of the time, we get a chance to work on our thinking. Which thoughts are wholesome and which thoughts are unwholesome. And that brings us into this second factor of right intention. And the Buddha said he divided his thoughts into 2 categories. This was before he became enlightened. And he put the wholesome thoughts in one category and the unwholesome thoughts in the other category. And he only had 3 kind of criteria. Is this a thought of renunciation? So renunciation, doesn't get that much good press these days, but it's letting go. It's letting go, and renunciation is sharing. The bhikkhuni I mentioned, who I live with, loves to share. And I've really learned some nuances about sharing from her that I didn't have before. It's really sweet. And you get to the point where you think, well, is there really anything that I couldn't share? And it's like, notice what you want to hold on to for yourself. Or notice what you want, if there's times when you want to take something from someone else. And it's not like, again, don't think you're bad. This is normal. This is like, we got into this life because we had the dark and the light in us. That's what human life is. It's got the good karma and the bad karma, and it's all a mix. If we were really, really, really like, when we're so super purified, we're in some deva realm, some heaven realm where everybody's like really chill. That ain't here. And we're also not in those really, really, really ugly places, because there's good. So we're in this mix, this human realm, this world. And we get to make choices. It's another thing I'm going to talk about later. It's like, I think, Tuesday night somewhere. Come here, I don't have to think about where, I don't have to think about when, they just wheel me in and okay, so we get to make choices. And the Buddha said we can make choices about what we think. Now, we have to make a distinction here about the thoughts that just pop into our head. Those didn't come by choice. That came by history. And we're not really responsible for that. I had a teacher a long time ago who said it's like tuning a radio. Well, nobody tunes a radio anymore, so I don't know if we can get a better metaphor. But when you used to have a dial on the radio and it would go from station to station, you get something, some music and static, and then somebody talking and static. And anyhow, anything can come through. And our mind is like that. Anything can pop up in there. And I've seen people get really upset about things that'll just come into their mind. Like, how could I think that? It's like, well, don't worry about it. It's just old stuff. That's all it is. It's old stuff. And it can be old stuff from way back. I actually happen to fully believe in past lives, and it can be stuff from who knows when, but it doesn't matter. When it comes, you can say, is this a thought I want to think? How would I feel if I died right now? Would I like to be caught dead in this thought? No. The Buddha was like, okay, this thought of longing, of wanting, of craving, of greed, I'm putting that in the unwholesome category. And the thought of renunciation, letting go, being free from that desire, those thoughts, that sharing, I'm going to put that in the wholesome category. And then he talked about thoughts of ill will and thoughts of cruelty. Actually, there are words I like better. Harmlessness, harmfulness, or harmlessness. So if he had a thought of ill will, wanting to harm, wanting to hurt, or anger, that went into the unwholesome category, of course. And goodwill, wanting to help, wanting to support, or in the Pali could be metta, loving kindness. And as we develop that and we have more of those thoughts and we put our attention more in that direction, eventually it's unconditional. Metta is unconditional love. And sometimes that can sound too lofty. You know, I've heard people say that for a human being, unconditional love is impossible. I can tell you for sure that's not true. It's just that we relax what we expect back from someone else. So if you're a parent, or if you're a child of parents, which most of us have had that experience, or someone caregiving, otherwise we probably wouldn't have made it this far, then we know that there can be these strong expectations of what we want in return for our love, or what is wanted in return. You know, how parents can be. They want to live sometimes. They want to live through their children. They want them to be a certain way. Or we might have a partner and we want that partner to be a certain way, to act a certain way towards us. And it's perfectly healthy and understandable that we encourage the people in our lives and we encourage ourselves to be kind and respectful and all of that. I'm not saying that, you know, there are no limits or boundaries. It's around being wholesome and unwholesome again. But the fact that we can actually love without those requirements, and that love can really shine on everyone, all beings, like the sun. Love that's like the sun, it shines on everyone equally. So that's kind of the ultimate. But even just in your thoughts, any old thought coming up, is this a thought of goodwill or is this a thought of ill will? And put them in their proper categories. And the same with harmlessness or compassion, thoughts of compassion and harmlessness, or thoughts of harming and cruelty, and putting them into their proper categories. And you know, we may think, well, it doesn't matter so much what I think, but the Buddha said that was the most powerful aspect of, you know, those three: thought, words, and action, because it's the way we think that leads to what we say and what we do. And I mean, it's not too hard to imagine what someone who takes a semi-automatic weapon to a playground, or in California, I'm very close to the Garlic Festival. That person had these thoughts, lots of them, around ill will, cruelty, and they let that build up and planned. This is horrible. And we have the opportunity to sift any inkling of any of that harmfulness out of our own mind. And instead encourage all the goodwill, the compassion, not just for other people, but for ourselves. If we're mean to ourselves, we can't really be fully kind to others. It has to be for everybody. And it's this idea that somehow I don't count, or it's okay to be hard on myself, is part of wrong view. It's like, this is something that we can learn to change. That we can be less self-identified in a way that we can be just as kind and supportive of ourselves as we are of others. And we can be just as selfless. It works both ways. Less greedy. And make the sharing between myself and everyone else more even, more balanced. And this is all part of right view and right intention. The wisdom to see that trying to gain things and hold on to them doesn't lead to happiness. It doesn't lead to peace. It doesn't lead to feeling better about ourselves or about the world. It's a loss. It's not a gain. So the Buddha warned against acquiring. Don't acquire things. But he was totally cool with people having wealth. It's not about the things. It's not about money. It's about how we relate to it. Are we open-hearted and generous? Or are we clinging? And you can see it in people who have a lot and people who have very little. And a lot of times people who have very little are more generous because the more people get, I feel like I noticed this where I live in Silicon Valley during the time in the 80s, 90s, whenever, the real boom, all people could talk about, some people, were the values of their stocks. And there was actually a case in a county court where someone that we have a mutual friend. This man was convicted of murder and sent to life in prison. And he didn't do it. They didn't even really have any real evidence. They wanted to hang it on someone, and he happened to be Hispanic. It was horrible. I saw there was such a sense of entitlement in the whole area. And it felt like people were getting more and more divisive the more they had, or the more they thought they had until the bubble burst. But it's like, what a change in mentality, in group mentality. More protective and more demonizing of others. Miracle of miracles, he did get set free later. His case was overturned. But to just see that could happen, that a jury of people who are probably pretty intelligent could convict someone on nothing because they wanted to keep that out, punish. So this all starts in the mind, in our own mind. And the right view that grasping, clinging, owning, feeling like we're going to find some kind of safety and security in that. Seeing that that doesn't work. Yes, being responsible about what we have and taking care of it. The Buddha praised that. He said, you need to protect what you have from fire and floods and greedy kings and ungrateful relatives. But it's not the same as clinging and hoarding and selfishness, acquiring. So I want to encourage you for the next couple hours, hour and a half, well, till lunch, really reflect on your thoughts. Which ones go in the wholesome category and which ones go in the unwholesome category? And if there's unwholesome ones, what kind of wrong view might be behind that? What do I think about the way things work? First of all, do I believe this thought? If it's something that just popped in the mind, it's like, no. We just say no. I know it's like when we have feeling, we can't just say no. We have to be present with it and observe it. And usually we can't just say no. You have to, saying no to feeling is usually suppressing it. That doesn't work because it comes out in funny ways later. But the fact that the Buddha said you can say no to thoughts, that's empowering. And he said those thoughts of letting go, renunciation, and thoughts of goodwill and thoughts of harmlessness, he said you can think that all day and all night and all week, and you might get tired from thinking, but that's the only harm that's going to happen. It doesn't hurt anyone. And it doesn't lead to hurting anyone. And so as you go through the whole rest of the morning, in meditation, if thoughts arise, while you're doing your work, whatever it is, notice. Does this one go into the wholesome category? Does this one go into the unwholesome category? Bring some wholesomeness around that. Some kindness and understanding around those unwholesome thoughts as well. And realize that, wherever that came from, and we may know where it came from. We all have conditioning and we all have past actions. And they leave imprints. So it's just old stuff. I don't believe that anymore. Or I don't believe that. No. And the more we do that, the more the mind gets conditioned to be in the wholesome. And then we eventually start having fewer and fewer of those unwholesome ones popping in. And even when they do, because some of that old conditioning is pretty strong, even when they do, then, like my friend with the it's like, okay, there's that unwholesome thought. I don't do that anymore. And then, if there's some element of wrong view, some idea that my actions don't count, that's one kind of wrong view. Or that my thoughts don't count, that there's no real result from good or bad actions, that's one kind of wrong view. That any of those unwholesome things are okay, that's a wrong view. And just see what you can find to purify the mind. And see what you can do to make this a enjoyable inquiry. Something that's interesting. And you're fascinating. I don't know if you realize that. That mind, wow, it's got so much potential and power and many little nooks and crannies to explore. And so see if you can enjoy the practice. I think that's probably enough said. Let's sit for about 20 minutes and then we'll do
Clarity and morality. We all need to practice clearly. We too need mental purity for freedom and tranquility. Mindfulness is the way to peace. It's the way to Nibbana peace. When will we remove all fetters? When will we know Dharma matters? Careless, reckless, restless with love, drifting along without purpose. It's time to stop the days. It's time to stop the praise. Let's have mindful ways, peaceful days. Careless, reckless, restless with love, drifting along without purpose. It's time to stop the days. It's time to stop the praise. Let's have mindful ways, peaceful days. Careless, reckless, restless with love, drifting along without purpose. It's time to stop the days. It's time to stop the rain. Let's have mindful ways, peaceful days. Let's have mindful ways, peaceful days. Let's have mindful ways, peaceful days.
That's all for today. If you have any questions or concerns, please contact us at info@buddhadharmatv.com. We work hard to share the noble, peaceful, and sublime teachings of the Buddha with you, and helping you persuade the spiritual path under his wisdom. Please encourage and support those interested in the rational and enlightened teachings of the Buddha. We believe our programs on Buddha Dharma TV will inspire peace lovers around the globe. Good night. Namo Buddhaya.